Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second part of a presentation done by Cable 10 in Frankfort Park Recreation and Historical Sites, more correctly, the Capital City Museum, on the streetcars and interurbans of Kentucky. Yellow sparks over Frankfort, I guess we could call this, when transportation in Frankfort was powered by electric overhead wires. Interurbans are the big brothers of the streetcars. We're going to be talking about the interurban and Frankfort. Put this up. But basically, this gives you an idea of transportation in Kentucky before the interurban. We did have the railroad to travel. We did have stagecoaches that actually operated here out of Frankfort. It would take you north to Owenton, south to Lawrenceburg, and down to Danville. We had railroads too. By the way, this is supposedly the last stagecoach to operate in the United States. It ran from Burnside, Kentucky, over to Monticello. And the stagecoach owned by Wells Fargo and Company in San Francisco, I am told, is this stagecoach. The interurbans were supposed to be the path of a new dawn. Some of you may have heard the dot-com bubble compared to the interurban bubble. They come along in the 1890s and last through about the 1930s. New roads and the automobiles put them all out of existence. The only interurban left in the United States is the Chicago South Shore and South Bend. It runs from Chicago to Illinois to South Bend, Indiana, operated by the Northern Indiana Transit something. So anyway, there is still one interurban you can ride in the United States. They were supposed to connect the world together. They were going to build an interurban system that was going to run across the country. The thing with interurbans were they ran on an hourly schedule or a half-hour schedule, depending upon how heavily populated the area was. Railroads, you might have 2 to 3 trains a day from Frankfort to Lexington. Here you had a train every hour. We had a number of interurbans in Kentucky. Henderson, Kentucky to Evansville, Indiana. Louisville, Kentucky to LaGrange and Shelbyville, Kentucky. Louisville, Kentucky to Indianapolis, Indiana. Lexington to Paris, Georgetown, Frankfort, and Nicholasville. And Ashland, Kentucky to Huntington, West Virginia. And by ferry over to Ironton, Ohio, where they ran on over to Portsmouth. They never got around to building the bridge over the Ohio River there. By the way, the Henderson to Evansville, Indiana was not a bridge. It was a ferry across the river. Here are our systems in a map. The one up at Ashland and Huntington, the one here in central Kentucky based on Lexington, the one here in Louisville. I didn't mention all the lines that ran out, and then the line up to Indianapolis, and the line down here out of Henderson, which crossed over to Indiana, and Evansville had a bunch of lines running out from there. Once again, we need to mention the Kentucky separate coach law, because this impacts the interurbans. When you look at a diagram of an interurban car, they're usually divided into 3 sections: passenger, smoking, and baggage. In Kentucky, that means general passengers, colored, baggage. So it's just one of those sad comments upon Kentucky's history. In Ashland, we had the Camden Interstate interurban system, 1903 to 1970. By the way, if you're over in Huntington, driving the old road to Ashland and you come to Camden Park, that is the only interurban trolley park left in the United States. All the interurban companies had parks at the end of their lines. We're going to talk about the 2 the Kentucky Traction Terminal had, Bluegrass and Joyland. So that's left. They later become the Ohio Valley Company. They switched to buses and eventually go out of business at the end of World War II. Henderson is Evansville and Ohio Valley. They go out of business after a wreck. Louisville runs through 1935. The Depression does them in, plus a wreck. And now we're going to talk about the ones Lexington area. Kentucky Traction and Terminal. The first line to go is Georgetown, 1902, followed by the line to Paris. Then 1905, the line to Versailles. 1907, the Versailles line is extended to Frankfort. And in 1910, we built a line south from Lexington to Nicholasville. Here's these lines: Georgetown, Paris, to Versailles, up to Frankfort, and down to Nicholasville. Now, I want you to notice they have substations here, 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 and here. Substations, they're producing the electricity in Lexington. They're putting it over those wires. They got to maintain a set voltage to keep the cars running. As it goes out over the wires, I forgot to mention there's one in Versailles, the voltage drops down, just like the plant board does today. They got substations to get the voltage back up where they want it. So the Kentucky Traction and Terminal has substations. Here's the name of the lines: Bluegrass Traction, the Paris, Lexington, and Georgetown. Central Kentucky Traction, it puts in the one Lexington, Versailles, and Frankfort. Lexington Interurban, 1911, puts in the Lexington Nicholasville line. And then these are all taken over by Kentucky Traction and Terminal, which is part of the Midwest Utility Consortium, which is owned by Samuel Insull. Interestingly, the electric companies basically own almost all the streetcars and interurbans in the United States. And what happened was the streetcar companies and the interurbans began to produce electricity to run their cars. Well, you, the local business, say, hey man, could I buy some of your electricity to light my place, to run my place? And pretty quickly, the interurban companies or streetcar companies learned that the money is not to be made in moving people, but in selling electricity to various households, businesses, commercial and industrial. So they start moving over in that. And you find Kentucky, Sam Insull, and Midwest Utilities buying up these local streetcar and interurban companies for their electric distribution. Electricity, by the way, pre-World War II is all local. There is no national grid. There is no state grid. The electricity that's consumed in Frankfort is produced in Frankfort. Electricity consumed in Lexington is produced in Lexington. The first big plant that comes online is Dick's Dam. And Colonel George Chan, who was head of the historical side, I remember him showing me an article, an editorial saying that Dick's Dam is the greatest waste of money because there's never going to be enough customers for all the electricity they're going to produce. Were they wrong. But anyway, by the way, Sam Insull is arrested twice by the federal government in the 1930s. He is blamed for many of the bad things that happened. And both times, the court says he didn't do anything. He was just, selling electricity. The franchise did him in. He walks away, later dies in Paris, France. You will read that he died penniless. He died on the street, and apparently his pockets were robbed before he was reported dead. But anyway, Sam Insull, read his story. It's a very interesting story. The lines not built were Paris to Cynthiana, Lexington to Winchester, Lexington to Richmond, and Frankfort to Shelbyville. I wish I could show you the prospectus on the line from Frankfort to Shelbyville. It talks about all these major cities between Frankfort and Shelbyville. Let's see, these major cities were Bridgeport, Peytonia, Christiansburg, Baghdad, Mount Eden, Wadi, and there was a Christiansburg and a few other, and I'm going, they ain't got 50, each one of these haven't got 50 people today, and they make them like their streets were lined with gold. It never got built for numerous reasons. Construction cost was going to be very high. The gauge was standard gauge here in Kentucky Traction Terminal, 4 feet 8.5 inches between rails. The Louisville system was built to 5 foot between rails. Long story about the story. Anyway, here's one of the Time schedule, Frankfort to Versailles to Lexington and Nicholasville. Look at all the cars that are running from Frankfort over on the hour from 6 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. This is a interurban car in Lexington, downtown. Interurban line, you can see there is Frankfort, Bluegrass Traction. These companies go through a lot of names along the way. Here is the line in Lexington. I hope that I can show you this. This is the line Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific. You may know as Norfolk Southern from Cincinnati to Danville and South. Our line from Frankfort to Lexington going across. The line from Lawrenceburg through Versailles over. And here's our interurban coming in from Frankfort. Came over Angliana Avenue up through downtown. The line to Georgetown went on Georgetown Road. The line to Paris went on Paris Pike. And the line to Nicholasville went on Nicholasville Road. This is the roads that you have in central Kentucky at the beginning of the 20th century. Crushed stone roads, and then the interurban line right alongside of it. This is another one of the reasons why the interurban line disappears, because as they do road widening, of course, they want the interurban right away. Another view out on this is supposedly between Lexington and Versailles. This is supposedly over at Paris. This is on Versailles Road out by Jet. Streetcar, the interurban line. By the way, when you drive from Frankfort to Versailles, look on the right-hand side, and you can see in some places a shelf cut into the hillside. That's where the interurban ran. This is the power plant for the interurban over on Loudon Avenue in Lexington. This was the ice house. We had our own ice house here in Frankfort down where the at the end of Main Street, if you went down the river, and I'm trying to remember what's setting down there. The band shelter's down there now. But this was the ice company over there. They transferred ice over, wagons delivering ice. You got to remember, guys, weren't refrigerators around those days. Ice was used to cool your soft drink, your beer, keep meats fresh at home. This is a work gang on the track between Versailles and Frankfort. You can tell who's foreman. It was very hierarchically built back in those days. Notice the man on the left have a Stetson on. You know he's the foreman. The other guys have work hats on. There was a very rigid set of rules about if you were a certain person somewhere within the company, you wore a shirt, a tie, a hat. You wore a vest, shirt, tie, and hat. It was very rigid. We get all out of this after World War II, 1950 or so, when everybody just starts wearing jeans. But pre-1940, you can just look at somebody by their dress and quickly say what their status is within the community. There's another picture of road work on the Versailles Road, the track being put in. There's a conductor on the line. By the way, every conductor on the or motorman who collected money, that plate on the top of his hat had a number on it. So if you had a complaint and you didn't know the guy's name, all you had to do was the number, because the number was assigned to a motorman or the conductor, and the hand punch was assigned to him. Every hand punch was different. The hand punch I use when I conduct over the Bluegrass Railroad Museum is different from all the other conductors. All you got to do is look at the punch and say, aha, Bogart was conductor that day. So it's the same thing on here. This was regulated by the state government to ensure that if there was any complaints, that we knew who the exact person was. This is another view of one of the interurbans. with the crew standing there and their dispatcher who went out along the line if anything was wrong. Another one of the cars, this is one of the old wooden cars. Notice 2 trucks, 2 axles up front, 2 axles in the back. These are made out of wood. They're very heavy. They got a 2-man crew, conductor, and a motorman. If this is a factory building photograph, it doesn't have its real trucks underneath it yet. Here is an Interurban car in Lexington. Notice the front end of the car is the baggage section. They do less than carload loads. They are the UP, the FedEx, and the Amazon Prime of the day for moving goods. One of the stories that I was told when I started to do my railroad walking tours in Frankfort by some elderly ladies was they would, with their mother, come down to the Interurban station, get upon the Interurban car, dressed as if they were going to church, go to Lexington and buy goods. I'll most probably talk about this later. But they would never carry the goods from the store. They were ladies. The store would take the goods to the Interurban station where it would be put on the Interurban and brought to Frankfort. Here is a picture of one of these cars. Once again, notice as I was talking earlier, the front of the car for the motorman, the general passenger section, the Negro compartment, once again the separate coach act, and then the baggage compartment at the rear, mandated by law, and this runs throughout the era of streetcar service in Kentucky and up through after the Korean War. Unfortunate story of Frankfort. I'm going to stop for a minute and talk about James Ben Ali Higgins, the greatest name you could come up with. He owned the largest piece of real estate in the central bluegrass area in 1905, 1914, 8,900 acres. A dairy farm. If you go on the road from Lexington to Paris, Kentucky, you look off to the left, you will see this building on the side. It was his private Interurban station. And going back through that fence there was a railroad track that went over the Louisville-Nashville Railroad for bringing his private rail car in. This is a view of the house. It's still there. Some of it is. This was his mansion. It burnt. That's all that's left. You occasionally see wedding pictures taken in front of that. This was his dairy over there. It was a show place. It was the show place of dairy farms in the United States. University of Kentucky will build off this. It's an agricultural thing. U.S. Department of Agriculture brings people here to show it to them. He has his own milk car for moving milk from there into town. This is a picture of the car. Of course, it is cooled by ice, thus we need the ice plant. There is another one of the baggage cars in Lexington for not only moving milk, but other goods. Here's a drawing of one of those motor cars for moving goods. Ran into Frankfort. They actually ran along the line and picked up milk cans in the morning, brought them into Frankfort and dropped them off at the station, which was at Main and Lewis, carried then around by push cart to the depot to load it on a train to take into a creamery. Another one of the pictures, one of the freight motors. This was a car used for repairing the overhead wires. You got to maintain those wires. Hey, ice storms come along, they come down. Tree limbs fall, they come down. They just get old, they come down. The heat causes them to stretch. The cold causes them to, you're constantly out there repairing those lines and paying taxes on them. There's another one of the freight motors over in Lexington. They get what is called lightweight cars, Cincinnati curbside cars. I mentioned that in my other presentation on the Brill. These are lightweight one-man cars made of steel, made in Cincinnati, Ohio at Cincinnati Car Company, and they got a slight curve at the window line. It's like a crease, but it increased the strength of the metal by 100%. Here's a picture of the car. Once again, on the right-hand side, going back to the left, motormen, general public, colored section, baggage section. Now, in 1926, I believe it is, don't hold me to that date, I assume it was a University of Kentucky, I'll call it a basketball game. But anyway, the car is full with gentlemen coming back from Lexington to Paris. There's an African-American woman sitting in the colored section. The front of the car is just literally jammed, so some of the men decide to sit back in the colored section. She gets upset, she rings the thing and tells the motorman, get them out of here. They refuse. She gets back to town, she files a complaint in court, naming some of the guys that were back there. And they're taken to court, and they're fined. Yeah, it's for colored people only. You white guys aren't. So it went both ways. Interesting. There is one of the Cincinnati curbside cars. It's on for sales Pike heading into Frankfort. Another one of the pictures of them. They ordered 10 of these. One's wrecked, and they ordered another one, 311. Here's some pictures of them at end of service, 1934, over at the car barn in Lexington. A picture forward of the car looking up. We're looking back, and you can barely make out the words colored above the door. Here's a close-up. Look up at the very top. You see colored, so you know that section back there is reserved our African-American community. Another view, one of the curbside cars. We just got some pictures of the curbside cars. In Lexington, they're starting to bring buses in. Boo, hiss. Anyway, the buses were used actually as feeders to bring people into the line. The line to Richmond never gets built, so that becomes a bus line. The line to Nicholasville is a bus line. They run a bus line on up to Cynthiana, run people back. Another view of the bus with the interurbans in town, the freight motor. This is near the end of service. They're getting desperate. They're starting to lose money. They're trying to build up things, but the truck and the car and the bus is just siphoning people off who are so much cheaper to operate than these things are to operate. I mean, you got to generate your electricity, you got to maintain the streets, you got to maintain the wires, you got to pay real estate tax on your generating plant, on your overhead wires and the stuff in the street. Oh, by the way, you got to repair the streets. Here's their ice car that ran from the ice plant. This is the proposed station that never got built. It would have been across the street from Rupp Arena, where Victoria Square is now. They ran excursions, and one of the excursions was from Lexington to Frankfort, to come to Frankfort and ride the boats. Bluegrass Park, I got a picture of this later. Bluegrass Park. Joyland. This is their big park. It's out where I-75 and Paris Pike is now on the north side. It closes due to racial problems following the civil rights stuff in the 1950s. Right, wrong, and indifferent, what happened. Blame on all kinds of sides on this. And arson fire takes care of it, and it's gone. But Lexington loses its park out there, which, having talked to some elderly people way back when, this was apparently a very big thing, with the Joyland Club out there with the big bands playing, and to go out there on dates with your lady. This is 2 cars over in Lexington. 2 of the cars were bought and turned into a gasoline station run by the Carr brothers. The other cars are sold to Cleveland, Ohio for use in the Shaker Heights rapid transit, but they were never used, and nobody knows why they were never used. But anyway, there's another picture of the 2 cars over there. Here's the river excursion to Frankfort. And they would come over and ride either one of the packet boats, this is the Falls City, go up to Lock and Dam 5 and down, or they would go through Lock and Dam 4, go down to Monterey and turn and come back. This is the chaperone dancing on board the boat. So the other one was just for a ride. This one has come down to dance and have a good time. This is now they're out buying electricity and putting it in your house. You don't have to strike matches anymore. The danger of striking matches, just have an electric range in your house. Interesting side story on this. As I said, all utilities were local. Down in Owenton, the salesman came in and began to sell electric ranges. And he was run out of town, and it was made illegal to have electric cooking stoves in your house, because that meant they were going to have to build a bigger utility power plant that was only being used a couple hours a day when the women were cooking. Did not realize what was going to happen to the spread of electricity, radios, and everything, lights and that within the house. Elks Fair, this is actually over in Lexington, Madison Station Fair. Oh, electric fans help you. Bluegrass Park. I wanted to mention that before. That's over by Keeneland. As you're going to Keeneland and you drop down the hill and you start up to Keeneland on the left, the airport's on the right, and there's a church down there. This is where Bluegrass Park was. Dance pavilion, swings, canoeing in the river, in the creek. I assume they had a little dam down there to back it up. This only lasts into the 1920s and then is closed. Your freight service, Inauguration Day, coming into Lexington from Lexington and other places for the inauguration of the governor. On days like this is when they had to bring in the portable substation, which we'll talk about later, to boost the current so they get the cars up and down the hill. New package rates for moving goods. Remember that the UPS, FedEx, and Amazon Prime of the day were in Frankfort. We'll talk a little bit about that. Coming in from the left is the railroad track from Shelbyville and Louisville. It comes in, comes down, through town, goes on, heads out. At Clifton, it's split with one line going over to Versailles, the other line going over to Lexington. And then at the top, of course, we got the Frankfort and Cincinnati running over to Georgetown and Paris. For those who don't know, the Frankfort and Cincinnati never got to Cincinnati. It just went Frankfort to Georgetown to Paris. And running up Main Street Hill is the Kentucky Traction and Terminal line. There's our interurban car sitting at Ann and Main Street. There was a Y here. The car would have proceeded straight on down towards the McLean building, stopped, backed up on Ann Street, and then pulled forward. That's called a Y for turning streetcars and locomotives. And then it would have moved forward up to Lewis Street, which is where the depot was here in town for the interurban. That, of course, is a Cincinnati curbside car there. Here's a young couple at the depot. Apparently, we pulled one of the cars in. And, baggage there to go. They would, of course, have moved some baggage over the train station for moving. This is out on Versailles Road, Ashford Stud. I remember having a gentleman tell me way back when I used to be able to take tours back in Ashford. Long story about me and Ashford Stud way back when. Who was a long-time employee and talking about, when I told him about my interest, as standing there waiting for the interurban to show up and catching the interurban to either go to into Versailles or over to Frankfort. There is one of the old interurban lines, cars out on Versailles Road. I'm sorry, bad picture. Many pictures aren't very good, but they're the only thing you have, and you can only Photoshop them so much. So the Frankfort substation I talked about. It was located up by Green Hill Cemetery. You can see the dot up there by Frankfort, which shows you where the substation is on the map. This is not a substation on our line. This is a substation over outside Shelbyville, up by Claudia Sanders. If you look up at above the lower roof line, you can see where the wires came in and where the wires went out. And this is where they would boost the current back up to get their voltage back up. This is where the substation was here in Frankfort. Still there, being used by the plant board as a substation. This is the portable substation car they would bring in and tie it to electricity by the passing track up at the top of the hill by the cemetery. On inauguration days and other days when there was a huge crowd of people in Frankfurt and everybody was going to arrive or leave town at the same time. So they needed to boost the current. So this was a temporary station, or when they were doing repairs on one of the substations, they would bring this in to boost the voltage back up so they could run their cars. We're over in Georgetown. Georgetown, we have on the right-hand side, the CNO and TP, Southern back in those days, Cincinnati, Lexington. The bottom track coming across is the track to Midway and Versailles. And of course, the track coming across the top is the Frankfort and Cincinnati. And then coming up from the bottom left on up, circling through town, is the Kentucky Traction and Terminal, Interurban. Here is a view. You can see the track over on the left-hand side of the road by the Georgetown College. Another view of the track coming through town on Georgetown Road. This is out on Georgetown Road. The Interurban actually ducked through this covered bridge. Unfortunately, it's all gone. Here, as I said, they had a line that ran from Versailles through Midway to Georgetown. It was a Louisville Southern line. Later, Southern goes out of business in 1930s. But here, the Kentucky Traction and Terminal is crossing that railroad line on grade. They had to stop, and you can barely make out just to the left of the Interurban cars a telephone box. They had to call the Louisville Southern Railroad dispatcher, who was in Georgetown, and get clearance to cross the track. Once they had clearance, then they could cross the track and proceed on to Lexington. This is coming out from Georgetown. Here's another view of one of the cars in Georgetown. A ticket good on the Georgetown division. This is the Georgetown Lexington when it was Bluegrass Traction. Nicholasville. That was the last line built. That's the railroad track on the left. This is CNOTP. Let me pause for a second. Cincinnati in the 1870s builds a railroad south from Cincinnati. The Constitution of Ohio does not allow the city of Cincinnati to provide funds to a railroad to build, but it does not say that a city cannot build a railroad. So the city of Cincinnati builds a railroad from Cincinnati to Chattanooga, the Cincinnati Southern. They lease it to Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific, CNO&TP, who still owns the lease on the line. The lease is up in 2026. They, in turn, have granted track rights to Norfolk Southern, Southern in the old days, Queen and Crescent, to run on that track. So that's the story of the track. City of Cincinnati still owns it. They still get boohoo money every year from their renting it to the railroad. Coming in on the right, of course, is the traction company coming in. That's where it came in. It just stops short of here. This is the picture of the track. I was over at Transylvania College. This is for you researchers. Look inside all the folders, because the folder said building the road from Lexington to Nicholasville. Well, it's building a railroad. You might have thought it was a road. So these pictures were in it, showing the construction. They actually built this to steam railroad specification. When you say steam railroad, you're talking about a railroad. That was the federal term. The track that Corman runs through town, although a running diesel through, the federal government calls it a steam railroad. They've never updated the rules, so it's a steam railroad. Anyway, there's the trackage being built. There's the car coming into Nicholasville. This was a outing from Nicholasville to Lexington. There is the station in Lexington. By the way, it's the public library over there. Paris coming up. Coming in from the left is the Frankfort and Cincinnati. Coming up from the bottom is the Louisville, Nashville, from Lexington running north to Cincinnati. And coming off to the right is the track to Maysville. The Kentucky Traction and Terminal just came into town, dead-ended there and turned around. It did not come in town on the main street. It came in on the street on the back and ended in back of the courthouse. The courthouse is on the right. And notice of them running. They actually, the L&N was running some commuter rail service back in those times from Cynthiana to Falmouth down to Lexington and going the other way north. And they ended their commuter service because so many people in Paris switched over to the interurban. There is your interurban schedule. Notice it's almost on the every hour. I know they're not leaving on the hour, but it's 60 minutes between. Let's put it that way. There's the car in town. The courthouse is off to the right. The building on the left is their station in Paris. There's one of the interurban cars in Paris. It's sort of strange. They run 3 blocks from the depot, but there's no connection with the depot. You would have thought they might have put a shuttle car in. Now, all they ever run is interurbans into Paris, with the exception on Memorial Day, Decoration Day, and when there's big doings at the cemetery or the fairgrounds, they will bring some of the city cars up from Lexington and run them in local service from downtown Paris, either the cemetery or on out to the fairgrounds, which is out where the high school now is. And now we're coming into Versailles. Once again, coming in from the left on the lower side is the Louisville-Nashville Railroad from Frankfort across the southern on up, on down to Nicholasville, Richmond. The railroad coming across the upper end is the southern, which split at Versailles. One line going up to Midway and Georgetown, the other line into Lexington. As you come into into Versailles, let me rephrase that, on the bypass, you ever notice you cross a railroad track, you go about a tenth of a mile, cross the railroad track again. That first track you cross is the track they used to run from Versailles to Midway into Georgetown. They left that section in because it used to serve an industry. It no longer serves the industry, but the track is left in. That second track you cross is the track that ran from Lexington to, from Versailles to Lexington. So anyway, the line came into town, came in on Lexington Street, and then turned on Frankfort Street. It is coming off of Lexington Street, turning onto Frankfort Street. You can see the courthouse in the background, and on the right-hand side is the Woodford County Public Library. Another view of the car in Versailles, heading towards Frankfort. And one more view. This car is coming from Frankfort, getting ready to turn for Lexington. Some afterthoughts about this. I'm going to call upon you soon. And most of you are going, what's going on here? This is I am going to call card. I am going to call. Who sent I am going to call cards? Drummers did. You remember in the movie Music Man? They're drummers. They're going from city to city trying to drum up business, pick up orders, and sell stuff. This is a drummer's card. And what he has to do is he has sent it to Frankfort saying, hey, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. On such and such a date, I am going to be in or Frankfort, or Mr. Smith is going to call upon you. It gives the guy running Judd's, we'll talk about Judd's, time to put together his order, the stationery that he needs, because he knows the salesman is going to show up on such and such a date, and here's the order ready. The salesman doesn't walk in and The guy, oh, well, what do I need? No, he's already thought this out, maximizing time for the guy to move on. When I was a child in Newport, Kentucky, 1940s, I'm born, I'm thinking 45, 46. I can remember 3 times a month, a gentleman would come to our door with a book. The one gentleman was from the bank that had the mortgage. Mom would give him cash. The other gentleman was from the life insurance company. Mom would give him cash. And the other gentleman was from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Mom would give him cash. And he did this at a number of houses on the street in the area. I've always wondered why these guys weren't robbed. Here's another I will call card. You may expect me soon in Eastwood, Kentucky. Now, of course, this is some young gentleman who sent this to his girl in town. Would you like to take a ride to Paris, Kentucky with me? They will get on the interurban car, go through Lexington and up to Paris, get off, I don't know, have an ice cream or something there. Maybe ride to Frankfort and Cincinnati back. They will have a great outing on that day. But this is a postcard. Remember, in the days, beginning of the 20th century, postcards are the Facebook and the Instagram of the day. Postcards could be dropped off at the post office in the morning, delivered in Frankfort during the day. There was 2 mail deliveries at every house, morning and afternoon. You could give a postcard down at the Frankfort Depot in the morning and expect it to arrive at any place within 500 miles of Frankfort the next morning and be delivered by noon to there. That was those days. We've lost something in the mail service since then. Okay, remember when you're around the trackside to always look and listen, expect a train from any time. Trains cannot dodge you. You can only get out of their way. And once again, a little promo. My book on Frankfort streetcars and trolleys is on sale at the Capital City Museum or Poor Richards. And see you trackside standing in the clear. I hope you enjoyed this program brought to you by Cable 10 and put together by the Capital City Museum on the streetcars and interurbans of Frankfort. And remember, we have a very nice public transportation system in Frankfort, one of the finest in the state. I don't think you can come any other small town, I'm sorry to say Frankfort's a small town, but we are, that has such a tremendous bus service for moving you from here and there, here in Frankfort. We ought to thank the City Council for funding that, and thank yourself for funding it. Once again, stop by the Capital City Museum if you got any tokens or remembrances of the streetcars or interurbans that run in Frankfort. Beth Smith would love to add them to our collection. See you around. Take care. Goodbye.